calling me, Roger.
Yeah, okay. Yes, it was. Don't worry.
Okay, let's start, Roger.
Yes,
Okay.
ready?
Well, comrades, you're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. The discussion today, when brings together experiences and comrades' ideas from several countries around the world. So we're hoping today we'll be able to draw benefit from these experiences that various comrades have. Our two speakers today are Ian Drummond from Edinburgh and Nora Everett from Barnsley in Yorkshire. Now, the discussion today is not just about the practicalities of building a new left party. We must also use today's opportunity to analyse in depth the experiences which have been the experience of the British labour movement and the organised working class. There's a rich labour tradition in Britain or in the UK, as we know, going back to the Tall Puddle Martyrs, attempts to form trade unions, and before that, even back to the Diggers in the time of the revolt against the monarchy in England. The Labour Party was founded at the turn of the 20th century from a combination of the trade union movement, the cooperative movement, and the Fabian Society. But since then, there have been, as I counted them there recently, 13 Labour governments elected in Britain. And there was a constant disappointment and a constant series of letdowns by the leaders of the movement right across these 13 separately elected Labour governments. As a consequence, there have been splits in the Labour movement, and what we're discussing today is the latest of these kind of processes within the organised working class. MacDonald, of course, betrayed the Labour movement in the early 1930s. The leader of the Labour Party moved across to form a coalition with right-wing forces and betrayed the working class. It happened later again in the 70s, what became known as the Gang of Four. That's Roy Hattersley, sorry, not Roy Hattersley, Roy Jenkins, William Rogers and company split from the Labour Party and joined up with the Liberal Party. So disappointment has been part and parcel of the struggles to build a socialist movement in Britain. There's a constant series of issues that kept coming up, which led to defeats and to splits. In the 1930s, Trotsky wrote about the experiences. He wrote significant works about the experiences in the British working class and the need to work together. In the 1930s, the Independent Labour Party split from the Labour Party. In fact, as far as I can recall, the militant headquarters in Bethnal Green in London was once the property of the Independent Labour Party. But the attempts to build a new left movement, there's a lot of rich experiences there, and we're hoping to use today's discussion to go into these experiences in some depth to see can we draw useful conclusions about today's experiences. There was a Tribune group in the Labour Party, which was a left group in the party, and one of the leaders of the Tribune, Michael Foot, became leader of the Labour Party subsequently and took the party nowhere. In more recent times, there have been attempts by Arthur Scargill to build an alternative to the Labour Party. There was a group around Ken Loach, the Rail Workers Union, and another group and other people to try and found an alternative to the Labour Party, which didn't achieve much success. Jeremy Corbyn, with his peace and justice movement, didn't achieve anything either. There were also splits, of course, in the Trotskyist movement. We need to bear that in mind as well, that were around the Labour Party. The united Trotskyist movement with the Revolutionary Communist Party in the post-war period split into different factions. The United Secretariat of the Fourth International by Frank. Then there was the International Socialists, which later became the Socialist Workers' Party with Tony Cliff, all, by the way, invented names. There was the group, the Revolutionary Socialist League, which Ted Grant led at the time. There was the Socialist Labour League, which Jerry Healy was leader of. So all of these parties were all, at various ways, presented as alternatives to the Labour Party, an alternative way to build a left movement. None of them have had any lasting success. Now today, there's an attempt to build a new Labour Party, and we have to make a new mass party, mass left party, So we're trying to find out ways in which we can avoid the pitfalls of the past, foresee possible pitfalls that come up in the movement. We need to compare experiences, and this meeting today consists of people with immense experience going back over decades in the Labour movement and in the various attempts to build a left alternative to the Labour Party. We need to draw on these experiences. We could compile a book from the experiences of the comrades, whom we can see on the screen here in front of me, about the experience of trying to build an alternative. No, we don't want to just remain where we are using the same old arguments. We have to use the new experiences we've had, and the idea is to try and succeed this time in building a true socialist left alternative to the Labour Party, which has been scandalously betrayed under Keir Starmer in the same ways it was previously by Tony Blair. But the situation we're in now is worse than in Blair's time, because now the bones of the Labour Party have been scattered. There's very little left now of substance around Starmer, and all the traditions of Labour have all been betrayed by Starmer, and the time has never been more opportune to build a new party at the left. Today, that's now been called Your Party. Not a name that will last very long, I'm sure, but nonetheless, it reflects the kind of processes that are happening around the Labour movement in Britain. So our first speaker today is Ian Drummond from Edinburgh. I think Ian, it was arranged you to be first. If not, I can change that. And then Nora Everett from Barnsley in Yorkshire. Sorry, Ian, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah,
Okay. So just before you speak, then, so Ian will speak first, and then Nora following that. I'm not sure about the time. How much time do you think you would need, Ian? Seeing the
Roger,
speakers?
Roger suggested about 15 minutes each.
Okay. So 15 minutes in the open contributions, and like I said, then we want to have a very thorough, a very detailed examination of the experiences which the comrades have following that. So there'll be questions, answers, contributions, summing up, and so on. So 15 minutes each, and for Ian and Nora to kick off the discussion. So Ian, fire away there.
Hi, thanks. I'll try in the 15 minutes to start with a bit of historical background on top of the very good introduction Finn's already given, and then get a little more into the weeds of the last few months and a bit of a conference report back. So if you let me know maybe a few minutes before due to wrap up in case I need to up the pace, and then hopefully I'll be able to answer lots of questions as well because there's been a lot going on and probably even more being reported than necessarily has gone on and or been debated in the media and left media in the last few weeks, especially, but really since the summer. It's like the storm after the calm in terms of setting up a new left party because we were stuck in the same debate of nothing much happening for a few years before that. I've now, it's scary thought to me, being involved in left politics for over 20 years. I got involved in the school protests in Edinburgh, school walkouts against the Iraq War in 2003. I think it's just a slight digression that might be valuable on this particular day. The uncanny similarities to some of the build-up with Venezuela, with its oil, with the military build-up, and hopefully it won't go the same way with a full-scale war. But perhaps a mass movement of that kind would be in order. I was just seeing that it's been mass demonstrations across South America over it. So I got involved in that and swiftly joined the Scottish Socialist Party that played a leading role in that. One of the left of Labour electoral challenges actually did quite well. At that point, it had one member of the Scottish Parliament. There was an election a couple of months after the war where it went up to six. It then, not that long after, split over a court case and went down to zero, both sides of it. The side that kept the name and the side that I was on at the election after that. Also because of my involvement in Stop the War, although it didn't organise in Scotland at the time, I joined Respect, and I was involved in that more thoroughly when I went to England to study. And there were other organisations to the left of Labour, like Left Unity with Ken Loach and others that also existed in those years. So even though I've been around for 20 years, the kind of auto-labourism where if you were a left-wing working class young person, you'd join the Labour Party or be a bit weird, a bit out there if you didn't. Uh, I can only remember vaguely, and some of the memories came back to me through my parents. Really, that sort of politics from before my time. Some of it came back to me in the Corbyn years when we had a brief revival. But really, ever since, even before I was involved in politics, the Tony Blair capture of the Labour Party was the kind of dominant uh, scenario on left of Tory politics. And there were some real breakthroughs. The Scottish Socialist Party, Respect twice with George Galloway under first past the post. But the real breakthrough, ironically, happened in the Labour Party itself when it opened. The right wing got careless, got cocky, thought everyone agreed with them, and opened up to one member, one vote, and even opening up voting for anyone who signed up and paid £3 as a supporter of the party, thinking that they'd vote for the more centrist candidate because there were more people, also to obviously get the trade unions who had a role in the Labour Party elections before, and elected Ed Miliband as a soft left candidate over his quite hard right brother, David Miliband, who was the preferred Blairite candidate. So they miscalculated, and they got Jeremy Corbyn, who came from 500 to 1, albeit before he got on the ballot, and then about 100 to 1 once he did get on the ballot, with MPs who later on called themselves morons, lending him their vote, either because they thought it didn't matter, that fair play, or more likely because they thought the left would actually get crushed and it would show how unpopular our ideas of standing up to austerity were, and how much more sensible their ideas of swallowing the Tory manifesto after yet another Tory victory in 2015 in the election were. So obviously they got the shock of their lives, and next few years were a real maelstrom of politics internal to the Labour Party, but reaching out beyond it as well. The best example being the 2017 election, when Corbyn was actually on quite a low ebb in the party immediately preceding the election. There'd already been issues around Ken Livingstone. I think there was an inadequate defence made of one of the real giants of the Labour left and of Labour itself. And the vultures were already circling around the Corbyn leadership by 2017, and there'd been Brexit. And the Tories had a brief gunfight. Boris Johnson at that point burning up after endorsing Brexit, not thinking it could actually win for his own reasons. And Theresa May seemingly quite strong in getting into Downing Street and calling an election where she swiftly lost her majority instead, and Labour got about 40% of the vote. It was on 45% in the polls not long after that. The biggest swing to Labour since Clement Attlee in 1945, and Corbyn was secured in leadership for an extended period. But then the Brexit slow grind, getting into the parliamentary bubble, the consistent unwillingness to tackle head on and defeat the false bad faith allegations of anti-Semitism for being pro-Palestinian, effectively, that were levelled at Corbyn and his supporters in the party, took their toll by 2019, where we still got a lot more votes than Keir Starmer, but the Tories also had a much better narrative in that year to consolidate the Brexit vote around them, get Brexit done versus renegotiate the deal and then campaign against what you've renegotiated. That was Keir Starmer's approach that basically threw the election and then got rewarded for failure by becoming leader. So ever since then, there's been the question of a new party posed once again, because Keir Starmer absolutely terrible background as director of public prosecutions. The only one I remember being quite often on the TV, always, as far as I could remember, defending why they had to come down like a ton of bricks on ordinary people or why they couldn't go after powerful people or institutions. So, not a Labour type guy, I ever thought. But somehow he was able to say that he'd be a continuity candidate to defeat the actual continuity Corbyn candidate who still clung to the old kind of momentum line and almost ran as an incumbent just after he'd been smashed. Some of the better possible candidates like Laura Pidcock having lost their seats. There was real questions of a split being premature at that point. Corbyn didn't get ousted from the leadership while he tried in 2016. He resigned after losing an election. His candidate unfortunately lost to Keir Starmer in a contest that wasn't rigged. It was just that Starmer told lots of lies. And had COVID not immediately hit, had branches still been meeting, I'd still maintain there would have been room for more of a site of struggle in the Labour Party at that time. Come the 2021 conference, which is probably what got me flung out of the party, because I made a few well-noticed points of order against Starmer's railroading of anti-democratic changes, including a list of proscriptions of groups to be retroactively enforced that included expelling Ken Loach. Also expelling Ken Loach. I I think even then, it was if Unison, for example, had voted the other way. The General Secretary wouldn't have been endorsed. The rule changes wouldn't have happened, and so on. So Starmer was actually on the ropes. There was a by-election not long before that in Batley that there was mainstream media discussing. He might have been considering resigning if he lost, and it was actually a surprise that Labour didn't lose at that point. They recently lost in Hartlepool with this huge blow-up doll of Boris Johnson unveiled on the beach the morning after, and that Starmer was seeming like a totally hopeless leader as well as a right-wing one. But after that conference, everything started coming up Starmer, mainly because the Tories were falling apart. There was a Partygate scandal with Boris Johnson throwing parties in Downing Street during COVID. Then there was Liz Truss as Boris Johnson's replacement to crash the economy with only 50 odd days in office, less than half the next shortest premiership of a guy who actually died in office, which wasn't her excuse. She'll probably be getting her state pension of hundreds of thousands of pounds for decades to come. Not bad for a small state extremist, you'd think. So Labour was basically winning by default, and that's what happened at the election. And of course, that cemented power around Starmer, as well as the undemocratic changes, probably of locking things down anyway. And so, come that point, the clamour was growing every month, every year that it went on for Jeremy Corbyn to set up a new party. There were various attempts to set up new parties in those years. Some were quite small and didn't make much headway, like the Breakthrough Party and Transform, which is now dissolved and gone into your party. Some were had quite specific political programs that didn't include our whole coalition, shall we say, like the Workers' Party around George Galloway, that did, on the other hand, actually win in Rochdale just before the general election, another by-election. But everyone was agreed, we don't actually want to be divided for once on the left, but there's none of these things as the thing that we can all unite around. We have to unite around Jeremy Corbyn as the lightning rod, who had been since not long after he left leadership, suspended as a Labour MP for having responded to a report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, ironically in a way that the report itself said was totally legitimate comment to make, by saying that it had been politically used, but allegations had been used for political ends. And the report actually said you could make arguments around that, and when the former leader did, he was promptly kicked out the parliamentary party to sit as an independent while still being a member of the Labour Party itself for the best part of 4 years. and only left Labour fully when he stood as an independent at the election. There was an argument for the first year, at least, or so before the conference, that there was a real struggle to be had. Jeremy's right to be allowed back into the party. But the longer it went on, the longer that was almost a moot point. And certainly after he stood as an independent, there was no way back. And by that stage, the Gaza movement had started, which really electrified politics in this country. Um, it uh, I mean, Starmer's role coming straight out of a witch hunt of the pro-Palestinian left as a bunch of anti-Semites was predictably terrible. Went on the radio and said Israel does have that right when asked, does it have the right to cut off power and water to Gaza? He later said he only meant the generic right to defend itself, but the evidence was quite clear, and his outriders were even arguing for it until he changed his mind and said he'd never said it in the first place. So there were all sorts of challenges to Labour MPs. One of them against Wes Streeting, one of the most right-wing Labour MPs, was only very narrowly defeated. The difference was lower than the Green vote for between Wes Streeting and Leanne Mohammed in Epping, not in I can't remember the name of West Streeting seat, but you get the drift. In the neighbouring seat in Epping, and uh, Faiza Shaheen, who'd almost beat Ian Duncan Smith the year before the election before, was deselected at the last minute for retweeting the American Jewish mainstream left comedian Jon Stewart, and a Starmerite parachuted in, split the vote, and let Duncan Smith back into Parliament when he'd have been defeated. This is the former leader of the Tories, former Minister of Welfare, who was a particularly horrible role in the early Cameron governments on benefits. And but as well as some defeats across the country and narrow, um, uh, even in Starmer's own seat, where I campaigned quite a bit for Andrew Feinstein, former South African MP, former member of the Labour Party in Starmer's constituency, had become a very erudite critic of Starmer in the previous years. He was persuaded to stand against Starmer, and he came quite a close second, certainly well out ahead of anybody else. And some polls since have said that he's predicted to win it next time, though that presupposes Keir Starmer will ever stand for Parliament again, which currently looks doubtful. So there were a lot of Gaza candidates, and four of them actually won. In Blackburn, where it was a strange case, the original Gaza candidate who I supported, Craig Murray, I was at a meeting where he was sort of adopted as the candidate, the meeting about local Gaza challenges at that point before the general election was called, and the local council group, because a lot of independent council groups were starting to split away from Labour on various political bases, but all to the left and all more anti-war than Starmer. They were all cheering Craig Murray on, but then ended up backing another guy who won the seat and has gone on to play quite a divisive role in the formation of your party and then left it. And there was another guy, Iqbal Mohammed, elected in Dewsbury, who has also now left the Your Party founding process, which I was very sorry to see, because although I wasn't involved in that campaign, I read about how he united the whole community around him, came from nowhere to get something like over 50% of the vote. And Leicester, Shaukat Adam was probably the best known of these candidates. He beat John Ashworth, the former Shadow Health Secretary, who played a particularly treacherous role in the 2019 election. And Ayub Khan, a former Lib Dem Gaza candidate, won in Birmingham, and Jeremy Corbyn kept his own seat. And so coming out of that, actually going into that, but especially with the pressure building further and further coming out of that, they were calling for a new party and for Jeremy to be the lightning rod to set it up. Since even before the election, there'd been a group with some of these splinter left parties, existing left parties, local groups, individuals in play to discuss this setting up of a new party called the Collective, which me and I think other people on the call, Matthew from Scotland, Roger, I know, got involved with. I was never at the national meetings. I got involved around the turn of the year in Scotland when they were looking for more contacts up here. I was amazed on getting involved at the turn of this year that had been going on for a year or so already. So now that makes almost two. And the main block was that Jeremy didn't want to do it. At this point, I think Carrie Murphy, Lynn McCluskey, people who've come under a lot of criticism, some of it quite warranted, were actually at that point playing a very positive role in that they wanted to get Jeremy to the altar, and they got him some of the way. But even since I got involved at the start of this year, there was always missed deadlines, constant delays. Jeremy's about to do it, then he didn't. Various discussions of, well, he might support it but not join it, or he might join it but not be the leader, or we might launch it with an appeal to him once we know that his answer would be yes, and all sorts of ideas swirling around. Eventually, there was a vote between Collective and another group, Memorandum of Understanding. I think some of the details are still murky. Certainly, the group that came out of it, people like Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll, and Beth Winter became the directors of that company. And of those three, at least two of them, Feinstein and Driscoll, just to say he was a incumbent mayor who got deselected by Labour and stood as
Ian,
an
I'm
independent.
sorry to interrupt you,
Oh,
Ian. You've been speaking for around 15 minutes.
oh, sorry.
You can
Right,
keep
I'll
going.
hurry up now.
No, keep going, just to remind you.
All right, sorry, comrade. I thought I might
No,
go on, so
continue
I
on.
appreciate that. Yeah, just Driscoll uh, was a former mayor who got deselected. He never said why, but publicly, but we kind of all know the reason was he shared a platform with Ken Loach to discuss an anti-racist film set in his local area. But him and Feinstein, the point I was making was they actually started out as localists. So a bit like Corbyn, they were wanting to continue building these different independent groups around the country, whereas most people, including Carrie Murphy and Lynn McCluskey, at that point were wanting to go with a national party to start unifying them, which is what I think most people certainly what the campaign for a mass workers party that I was involved with I'm involved with Matthew and Roger and others were also calling for, and that the constant delays were sapping the energy. Um, so they'd been localists, but they seem to have also come over to the new party idea by that point. So as a vote, and the vote went against Jeremy's own wishes for a joint leadership between him and Sarah Sultana, a very left-wing Labour MP who'd defected. Some say, so her critics say, defected only on the basis of being made joint leader. That much is unclear. She definitely left the Labour Party before she was pushed, having made some very good interventions in Parliament, one of which I don't know if there's any other examples of this, was almost like Hansard edited by Stalin, where she said something I couldn't repeat because it would be illegal. But it was said under parliamentary privilege and at a time when it was not illegal to say it. And she wasn't, and then was actually struck from the record as well. It was on the prescription of a certain pro-Palestinian campaign group. And so she was making some very courageous interventions. She'd come out of the Corbyn movement, and before that, the anti-war movement, actually, when she was first elected. I knew she was one to watch because she said Salma Yaqub was her inspiration as a young Muslim woman growing up. Salma Yaqub being former leader of the Respect Party and very active in Stop the War. And it was actually Salma who chaired the meeting where Zara and Jeremy were adopted as joint leaders of the process to set up a new party. By this stage, Jeremy had sort of agreed to participate in that way, obviously, but he didn't want the joint leadership. And Zara then immediately announced that their joint leadership had been set up and that the party process was underway. And there were a few days where Jeremy didn't even publicly acknowledge it, and then eventually said, yes, he acknowledged it, but there was still work to do before it could get started. So he was still delaying at that stage. I think part of Zara's reason for announcing it was to make sure that it wasn't yet another false start, that something would then happen. And so eventually it did. The sign-ups were exceptionally impressive. It went up to 800,000 people signing up at that stage to express interest in the new thing. When it came, to be kept in touch for when they were able to become members of the party. That was in June or July. Come September, the process of setting up a membership portal was looming, and Zara set one up a few days early, and it's a murky debate whether she did that legitimately, whether it was in the agreement, whether the other side were going to set one up outside the agreement with her, whether she was obviously going ahead without agreement, quite problematic. In a way, it was a repeat of what she did to set the thing up initially, which had been,
Ian, I'm sorry to
by
interrupt
all
you.
accounts, a good thing.
Ian,
But
I'm sorry to
this,
interrupt you again. You've been talking for
all
about
right,
20 minutes now.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'll just hurry up then about this point about the factionalism. So basically, the setting up of the portal led to this huge tirade of factionalism that we've seen in the last 3 months or so. Fights over these legal positions, some of them taking legal action on them, which is pretty disgraceful. Continuing case lodged with the Information Commissioner's office, leaks to the press, the role of Feinstein, Winter, and Driscoll being dragged through the mud as the guarantors of some of the money that was raised under that system. Another portal was set up, I think, just a few days later. But in September, it looked like the thing could have fallen apart at that point. And then, and since September, my key point for this kind of whole talk really is that the membership have been the adults in the room. That while both Corbyn and Sultana's camps have at times been knocking lumps out of each other and have depressed the 800,000 sign-ups of interest, which would never have been 800,000 members exactly, but could have been a lot more than it is, down to 50,000 members now. The members who have been involved have all been demanding unity from both sides of the leadership. And really, the rank and file have been the canniest, most pragmatic operators in the thing, while the leadership have sometimes been accused of acting like children. I think to rush through the conference now, sorry, I
No,
didn't get around to
Ian,
that.
you've been speaking for 25 minutes.
Just to conclude on this
Yeah,
point
that's okay.
about the membership,
Okay. Yeah.
that's why I believe the conference voted for collective leadership to de-escalate the tensions between both sides, and it's a system that some people have criticised, some people have supported it as more democratic, but a lot of people are saying, why isn't there a named leader? But the fact that there won't be an immediate leadership contest between Corbyn and Sultana is, I think, a very big plus. There will now be voting between different candidates for the Central Executive Committee that will be the collective leadership. But it should steady the party, and the conference did also vote for dual membership, or as close to voting for dual membership was able to do on the order paper, having had very selective expulsions of a few members of the Socialist Workers' Party the night before conference was due to start. It voted in certainly the first tranche of votes from the first day, largely the way the leadership seemed to have not preferred. And those votes were then announced, despite all the setting of the question being quite problematic. They were announced by leadership in the way that they were, probably going against them too. And then the votes on the second day were a bit more mixed from my personal perspective. It's far too late to get into all of that, but I think what's happened is the membership have demanded unity. They have at every stage tried to knock heads together of Corbyn and Sultana. I think it might have been more positive of the emergency motion to establish a leadership by now, by the end of conference, had been heard, but the standing orders didn't allow that. There was talk that if Ken Loach had been well enough, he might have made conference himself to move that motion, but that wasn't to be. And there was some talk of it being disruption and so on, that people wanted to do that, but that really, in my view, wasn't the way. But at the same time, I think we have to now bring everyone together and knock heads together if necessary from below. It's what worked in September. It's what worked in conference. And there's a lot of other debates around the nuts and bolts of your party. Sortition was a big debate, for example. But since I've already used up too much of my time, I'll welcome that discussion in the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's just that looking at the gallery, there's a huge range of experiences here we want to draw on for the meeting. That's why we're trying to confine the opening contributions. But
Oh,
thank you
yeah,
very much for a very informative and a very interesting opening contribution. Our next speaker is Nora Everett from Barnsley in Yorkshire. She was also a delegate to the your party conference in Liverpool. What I'm going to do this time is I have a little bell here, which I would rather use than be jumping in on top of somebody who's speaking. So Ian has exceeded the 15 minutes, which is okay. That's not a problem. So you can speak for longer than 15, Nora. And instead of interrupting you in mid-sentence, I'll just ring this little bell to give you an indication that you've been speaking for 15 minutes, and then you can pare down your contribution towards the conclusion at that point. But you can speak beyond the 15, of course. But our next speaker is Nora Everett from Yorkshire, who was also a delegate at the Liverpool conference. Nora.
Thank you. Right. Can everybody hear me? I'm a bit low in voice. I've had a bug for the last fortnight, so I'm probably not even going to speak for 15 minutes. A little bit about me. I went to a first Labour Party meeting in 1964. I was a political idealist as a teenager, and I actually joined when Michael Foot was the leader in '83, and I've been politically active since. I learnt that movements were pulled together mainly by young people who were students, young people and students, and trade unions, and that many successful movements around the world which ended up in a revolution of some description, were actually started by women. So I've had lived experience of various single issue campaigns at local level and national level, etc. And I've learned through that it's easy to pull people round a cause where it's a single issue that affects everybody, and it's easy to mobilize people and to get people involved. The problem with the Labour movement is that it's everything that is involved. The Labour governments over years have really attacked particularly young people in the UK and they have destroyed a lot of the rights that trade unionists have worked for over the years, and a lot of campaigns have picked up that the Labour Party has just rejected and didn't sign up to. And the most recent one is the Palestinian cause. I left the Labour Party in the noughties when I'd had enough of their lies and destruction of what people had voted for in 1997. And I joined again with when Corbyn came around, but I mean, Ian has described a lot of what went on, but my view was he used to sit in his cupboard and not make a decision, and sort of close his, his head in the sand, whatever, and not actually come to any conclusions, and leave the movement to sort itself in the meantime, waiting for him to take action. He wasn't a leader. And when I left the Labour Party when they attacked him, and I was just totally felt let down by all of the left, because although there was people talking about it, nothing was happening to pull together the movement that Ian's already described, and yourself, Finn, about the need for a proper socialist party that would stand up for people and not just join the establishment status quo and carry on exploiting people and ignoring those that were struggling. The discussions Ian has described of the events leading up to the new party, I was involved in one of those over a year ago, November 24, one of Carrie Murphy's secret meetings in Birmingham. And the interesting thing there was the local organising, local councillors that were voted in on a local socialist ballot paper or whatever. There are various ones around the country, particularly in Liverpool and Oxford. They were arguing for a national party so that there was a national name on the ballot paper in all these little local areas, and that would build towards a national movement of the left. And that seems to have disappeared, because one of the votes at conference was to endorse any local party, local socialist party, local community organisation party candidates in the 26 elections, rather than only endorsing your party candidates. So although they were fighting for a national party with one name on the ballot papers all around the country, it's taken a step backwards already. It took a woman, a young MP, 30-something, to actually kick things off in July this year. She had the bottle to do something, got into a lot of grief about it, but we wouldn't be where we are if she hadn't done it. When she announced that the party existed and she was co-leader with Corbyn, as Ian described, he sat in his cupboard for a fortnight while he was trying to decide what to do. Meanwhile, 800,000 people plus had signed up to the new party, it lit a spark amongst the movement, particularly among young people. One of my kids, an afterthought, is in his 30s, and he's told me for the last 10 or 15 years that young people are turning their back on politics because they are just constantly attacked. Their future is being stolen from them by the political parties that are running the show, and nobody is considering their own futures. And they have all, loads of them have joined or signed up for your party in July this year. However, a lot of the shenanigans that Ian has described, hiccups and problems, a lot of them due to Corbyn using his parliamentary office, bureaucrats, part of the establishment, to run the communication of your party, which meant that local party organisers who were trying to set up branches had no membership lists, and ordinary members only had 4 emails in 3 months from the Your Party telling them how things were going. People, if they're going to join something, then they want something to do. They don't want to join there and then sit for months waiting for a contact. They want to be active. They want to be doing what they believe in. So that was one problem. And by the time of the conference, there were apparently 55,000 who'd actually signed up, which is 7% of the original signatories, which is not good. The conference was expected to be 4 sessions of 6,500 people or something like that, or 2 sessions of 13,000 people were going to be invited. And then it became, they were going to do the same thing on each day, and then they would have 6,500 people on 6,500 on Saturday and 6,500 on Sunday, and then it became one thing. And it was a lottery, which people weren't comfortable with because people wanted to have report backs from people who they knew had gone. And there was no announcement of who had been selected. So that the link with the local areas was not there, only when people were already involved in a small group and people knew that they were going because they shared the information. We were led to believe there were 4,000 people there, but the actual numbers apparently was 2,500, which is worrying. This movement, which was huge, has gone down to a very small thing. However, there were a number of votes, and we have no idea how many were actually voted. Normally, when you have a vote, you give the percentage and you give the total vote. But what we got was the percentages for and against. We didn't get anything about the total vote. As I said, there were a number of young people at the conference, and they were passionate. It was clear that they were really motivated, and quite a few got on the platform and were able to speak, and an awful lot of them jumped up and down trying to get to speak and were overlooked. But it was motivating to see the young people so enthusiastic. However, some of the votes were encouraging, but very close. The collective leadership, which is one that has been celebrated a lot it was 51.6% in favour, which was very close, 48.4 against. It wasn't that there were others that were very, very strong majorities. That the inclusion of the word socialist in the principles, political statement, and working class, that was 80 or 90 in each case. And one or two others votes were disappointing. You mentioned sortition. There was a choice between having all future conference, this is in the Constitution, have all future conference delegates nominated by their local branches and decided and elected by their local branches. And the alternative was to have some elected by their local branches and a proportion selected by sortition. And it was the sortition one that won. It's not going to go away. There were quite a few other votes that were not very. The dual membership one it came across as a wonderful, successful vote. It wasn't too bad. It was 69.2% in favour, but the wording actually includes the fact that the dual membership of organisations that are on a list, reviewed and updated by the conference, the central committee. They are, the list will be controlled by the centre, well, by the collective leadership, as it turns out. So we're effectively stuck by the fact that a certain number of organisations will be on that list and others won't, and only the central committee will make that decision. It's not as good as it originally appeared to be. There's a lot of bureaucracy still in the documents which haven't been updated. Everything is slow. One of the documents, the first year plan, had now actually has a timeline for the central committee elections, which is going to be shared by email tomorrow. And the opening for nominations for the central committee is, I think it's 5 p.m. a week tomorrow. And for nominations to be sent in. And voting starts, I've got it. I haven't got it handy, sorry. It's all going to be rushed through. Voting ends on the 2nd of January. And no, I've got that wrong. Nominations ends on the 2nd of January. And the voting starts and will end at I think it's the 23rd of February. And the new central committee will start work the end of February, 27th of February. And they will have to pull together any electoral documentation for manifestos or procedures or anything like that for the 26 elections. So they're rushing that through. And the difficulty I see is how on earth are the local areas? One of the votes was that the elections for Central Committee are regional. So there will be so many per region. They haven't told us. We might find out tomorrow what the regions are, how many there are, and what the process is for the nominations have got to be in very quickly with Christmas in the middle, and we've got to pull people together to find out who is wanting to stand, who is supported, get people who've not been involved in politics to understand that these people need to represent us, and we need to be able to trust them, and all that in a very, very short time without the membership list. It's going to be absolute chaos. However, we have our collective leadership at the end of February. I just hope that everybody can organise themselves in the different regions in time to make sure that decent people are elected onto this collective leadership. Because again, in the documents which haven't been changed or weren't amended, the collective leadership will be in place for 21 months. So that's quite a length of, well, it's quite an important period. I'm a bit concerned about the future of all this. It's very uncertain in my view. The conference itself had little impact in the media except for the expulsions and the threats of disruption, which make the left constantly look disjointed and arguing against each other. But that was visible from the outside as well. There were the usual 3 or 4 different papers, 3 or 4 different groups of paper sellers, and lots of individual statement papers being handed out outside any of the events and outside the conference itself. And I fear that there are too many groups, too many factions who are going to be pulling together a slate for this Central Committee. There's been attempts in the last 6 months to pull the different groups in across the nation together. There've been a number of organizations trying to pull people together to discuss things and work together. But there's at least 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them. And that they tried to pull it together during or just before the conference. And some outside groups, trying not to name names, but it's hard, were included, and they immediately took over to influence to their way of thinking rather than working together. This is my problem. There seem to be too many groups that are trying to influence things rather than working together. They're opposing each other, or they're trying to take control of and pushing for control. And this is happening in a number of local areas, and it's happening nationally now. And I just see that unless they stop opposing each other and try harder to work together, and some of them are looking at dissolving themselves and just joining your party as ordinary members. others are not. And it's just going to be very, very difficult, given the build-up and the expectation 6 months ago that has fizzled out to 7% of what it was, with all these groups still vying for position. I really fear for the future of the movement. And as everybody says, this is our only chance, certainly in this generation, certainly in my lifetime. I'm sorry to be so negative, but as I say, I have been fighting either COVID or flu or something for the last 2 weeks, so maybe that's the reason.
Thank you, Nora, for that contribution, which will add considerably to our understanding of the processes taking place. I noticed looking around the gallery here, the immense experience that's in front of me from the comrades. As you see, Roger and I were together in the West London Labour Party in the early 70s, 50 years ago. See, John Donna's immense experience in the Miners' Union and the political links with the Labour Party. John and Dominic Byrne with their experience in the Manchester Labour Party for decades. And then Carol and Dave Buxton with an immense record behind them in the New Left Labour Party. And when I see all that experience around on the screen, we need to bring that into the discussion and examine. And one of the questions we would like comrades to focus on is why? Why have all the previous attempts to replace the Labour Party failed? What were the precise processes that brought that about? We also need to examine the issue of the trade union movement. What role did the trade union movement play in the building of the new party, and what role has it played to date? So we need to examine questions of that nature. And looking at the gallery, there's immense experience looking out at me here, and we want to draw it into the discussion. I'm sorry, Nora, for using the bell there, and I'm sorry, Ian, for interrupting you when you were talking, but I'm still going to use this thing. So if I think any comrade who's making a contribution is using up time that could usually be given to somebody else, there'd be a little ring of the bell. I'm apologising in advance, but it's comrades should listen to other contributions and make sure they don't repeat points that have been made, and make sure they're contributing to a deeper understanding of the processes, and particularly why earlier attempts have failed and why this new attempt might succeed or might not succeed. So it's now open to discussion. After a few comrades have spoken, we'll ask Ian and Nora whether they want to make an intervention at that point, and later on then we'll do a summary of the meeting from both the initial speakers. So thanks again to Ian, and thanks again to Nora, who's battling with illness, and we appreciate your efforts in that regard. So we have an indication from Matthew, an indication from Roger. Okay, Matthew?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, comrades. I was at Liverpool as well. I think the thing is, I think to understand this, I mean, first of all, is to look at the political basis of it. The problem being, of course, is that it's attempting to form some variety of reformist organisation on the basis of the collapse of the Labour Party into naked repression, neoliberalism, etc., and war. Under the conditions in which the ruling class have made it absolutely clear repeatedly that they are not going to concede any reforms, in the current period, as far as they're concerned, for a prolonged period. So actually, the political basis of the thing is very shaky. I mean, is it willing to oppose the ruling class, on some kind of a basis, which would then amount to revolutionary, or some kind of revolutionary basis, which is what actually, interesting enough, what Zara Sultana said, she called for revolution, because obviously that's the only basis it could actually function. I think the character of the conference is obviously due to a number of factors. I don't, especially think it's down to the lack of willingness. The problem is they called a conference at very short notice, and with no assistance of any sort to get to Liverpool or stay in Liverpool. So what you got were the people who were prepared to put out their own money and go to Liverpool and find themselves somewhere to stay, which is the left. I mean, it's the most dedicated section of the left, and that's where you got. It wasn't, a wider section. That's why you got who you got. And I don't think it necessarily means that the difference between the organisation more widely, because I mean under the conditions that you would expect to get. The other thing, of course, is that there is this effort, or there was this effort, in order to try and control the whole show, which I mean largely succeeded, because actually they were able to impose what the conference was discussing, rather than the conference actually discussing what it needed to discuss, around the question of issues of politics, around the questions of actually setting up a constitution, etc., that's functional. I mean, the constitution they did agree is completely non-functional. It's a farce, on any basis you can go through it. It's the worst constitution I've ever seen, I think, of any organisation. It's just a token thing. It's not something you can actually operate with. And so there was this effort to try and prevent people from discussing what needed and what people had indicated with some effort that they wanted to discuss. And so in those terms, it was a controlled show. As somebody pointed out, we got an hour in a dozen hours of conference. We got an hour of Corbyn, who said virtually nothing. I mean, nothing more than he usually says. So in those terms, I mean, you see the nature of it. And the problem being, of course, is that it became clear that, sorry, I'm suffering from something I got at conference too. The bulk of people on the floor actually opposed the entire setup. The fact that they were being manipulated from behind a curtain, as people pointed out, and that that there were things they wanted to discuss and needed to discuss, and they weren't being allowed to. And so, in those terms, I mean, it was fairly disastrous for the people. And there is a rumor now that the person, Corbyn and Len McCluskey's chief apparatchik, Carrie Murphy, is on the point of resigning from the whole show. Because obviously she hasn't got a basis to carry on in those terms, because she's got no support. And this is the problem they've got, is that actually in order to control the thing, they need some kind of a base, and they haven't got one. And so it makes it very unstable. And the question then becomes, well, where does it go? I mean, ultimately it's about election of a leadership. And the problem being, of course, is the leadership the structure is inadequate. I mean, to elect 16 or 18 people, which is what they intend to do, to run an organisation of any size is ridiculous and completely ludicrous. Just it's not the size able to do that. It's both organisationally and politically deeply unstable, and so it would seem that it's yet another effort, but the underlying thing is not some kind of personal issue. The underlying thing is a political question of what kind of organisation is and what programme has it got to fight against the move towards austerity and war. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for keeping to your time as well. Appreciate that. Roger.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, comrades. I think the note that Nora ended on was the key one. What actually are the prospects? I think the fact is that we've got one of our bigger attendances at our meeting today, because there are comrades from all over the world, comrades from America in the west to India in the east and many other countries. And from their point of view, they want to see the eyes of the world, the eyes of advanced workers and socialists around the world are on this, because they want to see, is this going to be the breakthrough? Because all the traditional workers' parties throughout the world have collapsed. Not only politically have they failed to offer an alternative and a defensive against capitalism, but actually, in most cases, they've actually disintegrated. There's hardly anything left of the main social democratic parties of Europe, of the Social Democrats in Germany or in Scandinavia, the Communist Party in Italy, etc., etc. And that's why there is so much interest. People come here because they want to know, is this, their eyes were fixated on this conference to see, is this going to at last break the spell and revive traditions of workers, parties struggling for a socialist society? And I think that's what we need to, we don't want to dwell too much on the particular mistakes and blunders and shenanigans and tricks and all the rest. We want to see what actually is behind all this. And the fact is that, I mean, of course, there were all kinds of mistakes made, but they weren't just mistakes. They were a reflection of the fact that there is a crisis in the labour movement. There's a crisis of how we are going to create a new offensive against capitalism, a political offensive. And I think the point is first that the old working class has largely been eroded in Britain and in most of the other countries where there was a tradition of industrial struggle, of a concentrated working class, and the parties based on that. We discussed that before many times, and I think we need to return to that. But that's the reason why the crumbling, why in fact, the Labour Party, for instance, although it won what looked like a landslide election victory only a year ago, actually it was the smallest vote and the smallest percentage of the vote of any ruling party, and it came about because of a split in in the Tory party and the creation of a very sinister and dangerous far right party in the form of reform. Now, the Labour Party was a workers' party, something we've discussed before, and I know some people dispute that. But the Labour Party was a workers' party insofar as there ever was a workers' party anywhere in the world. In fact, more so because it was actually based, it was the political expression of the trade unions. And when people say, "Oh, Lenin said it was a bourgeois workers' party," and so on, that was just we discuss this in length maybe some other time, but it was just a passing witticism by Lenin, because in the same speech in which he made that comment, he was urging the communists in Britain to affiliate to the Labour Party, because he said it is a workers' party. Said, yes, a bourgeois workers' party, but it's a workers' party. That's where the working class is based. It was a workers' party, and it was a socialist party. Again, people throw up their hands in horror and say, "How could it be? How could you say that?" It was a socialist party in the same sense that the Socialist Party of France were a workers' party, and the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and the Social Democratic parties of Scandinavia, etc. They were all parties that claimed to stand for socialism, and it's very, very significant that when Blair took over the Labour Party in 1994, his very, very first act was to call a conference with the sole objective of removing clause 4 of the party constitution, which was the clause in the constitution which said we stand for nationalisation of the economy, and that was it was a signal to the ruling class to say, look, we've abandoned all that. We don't even pretend anymore to be socialists. We are a safe party of the ruling class. And there was a blip with that by a blunder, which again don't need to go into now, but by a stupid, arrogant blunder of the right wing, they allowed themselves to be caught in this predicament where Corbyn won the leadership, and Corbyn was an old style socialist, but a social democrat, a reformist, but nevertheless stood for something like the old traditions, the original traditions of Labour, a reformist party, and he got in because they arrogantly thought that if they throw open the franchise to anybody who wanted to vote, whether or not they were Labour Party members, they thought they were so popular that they would get their own Blairite candidates in position. But they completely misunderstood the situation. That there was a huge surge to say we want something different, and the same thing happened with this party too. The reason why 800,000 people signed up within days of Zara Sultana making the announcement was because there's a huge pent-up urge that we need an anti-capitalist party. We need a party which is going to clear away this corrupt and repressive ruling class and install a government which is going to be responsive to the needs of the working population. And the fact is that the whole question about this conference and everything that happened since is: are they going to live up to that promise, or are they not? Now, Corbyn was terrified by this process. These blunders at the conference were not just they weren't just mistakes. They weren't just due to misunderstandings. The fact is that Corbyn never wanted to be a leader of anything. He never wanted to be leader of the Labour Party. From the moment that he became leader, to his own surprise, he was desperate to hand power back to the right wing, as he did, and in the process, stabbing in the back or many of his allies who were expelled, as many of us were expelled from the Labour Party, for supporting the leader, believe it or not. And he was terrified of the responsibility of being held to account and so on. And there is a pent-up thirst. And the question now with the new party is: will it or won't it be able to live up to the aspirations of the kind of unspoken, mute aspirations of a huge portion of society who want a revolutionary party? They wouldn't call it perhaps revolutionary, but they want a militant alternative to the corrupt and repressive regime that is ruining their lives at the present time. And that is what is at stake. Now, we've got, I would say, 6 months to see whether or not it will live up to that. It was very interesting to see at the conference that, despite the fact that they did all they could, Corbyn and his sidekicks like Carrie Murphy did all they could to manipulate the conference by, for instance, not allowing the bona fide creation of branches, and by saying that there wouldn't be delegates, but there would just be a random lottery. We're quite lucky that 5 comrades who are affiliated, if you like, to win, found themselves as delegates to the conference simply by a raffle, by a lottery. But anyway, the fact is that they did all they could to prevent it being an accountable conference, where, as Nora explained, where delegates could report back to their branches and could convey the wishes, could express the wishes and aspirations of their members and all the rest of it, and so on. So, will it happen or will it not? The fact is, though, that even by this random lottery selection of delegates to the conference, it still led to an overwhelming revolt against the Corbyn leadership, if you like. Corbyn wanted to have a one-man leadership or a one-person leadership, and he failed in that. The conference voted overwhelmingly. No, sorry, not overwhelmingly, but they voted for by a majority for a collective leadership. They rejected the idea of one person being able to really unaccountably to speak on behalf of the party. And on all the other things, including the question of dual membership, which we should explain means: are you going to allow people who've been active in the absence of any mass workers' party, being active in trying to organise in little parties of their own? They said, yes, we want dual membership. We want people. We're not going to exclude people who, by default, have been active. The idea that we just want inactive members who've not been doing anything until this new party was proclaimed was rejected overwhelmingly. And the idea that this question of sortition, in other words, random selection of delegates, It's the same mistake as the right wing made in the Labour Party in 2016. They thought, oh well, if you just pick people at random, then they won't be so left. But in fact, overwhelmingly, it was a left-wing conference. So the question is now, we've got, I would say, 6 months or so to see. I don't by any means feel complacent that a new party is being created. But on the other hand, I think it's too early to write off the prospect of the new party. And if the rank and file succeed in moulding the party to their own aspirations, then I think not only is it going to change the whole situation in Britain, but worldwide too, because those 800,000 people who signed up, they're not signed up, but expressed an interest in signing up to a new party, that is very, very significant. The reason why Reform, the disgusting, racist, far right party of Nigel Farage, it seems to be online to win the next election. And actually, that would be a complete catastrophe for the working class in Britain. But the reason why there's a surge towards reform is because of desperation that we talk about the two-party system in Britain. Both parties are about to be destroyed. Both the Tory party and the Labour Party will be wiped out at the next election. And therefore, the people who, in desperation, have followed the seemingly radical policies of reform, they are desperately searching out, crying out for a left alternative which actually represents their interests. And that is what the next few months will decide whether or not that will materialize. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Roger. Now, while I'm waiting for Congress to contribute, it just struck me the English playwright Tom Stoppard died recently, and he wrote a play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. These are two characters from Hamlet, and the play begins with them tossing a coin, which always ends up on the same side. So each time they toss the coin, the result is the same. So I thought it was an interesting observation in relation to the way this discussion is going. So I'd like Congress to contribute, particularly those who have background and experience in the movement and trying to build the left in Britain. Eric, you've indicated you're next to speak.
Well, yeah, that wouldn't be me because we don't have a Labor Party or anything like it here in the States. We've got unions that are one degree or another completely bureaucratized. What I'm left curious with, as a person looking in from the outside and kind of looking for guide and lead, and I'm reminded of the conversations I'm having with some younger comrades in DSA that are trying 20 different things. I always try what I learned in the CWI 40 years ago, the centrality of program. What are you for? Yeah. It was interesting, these different factions, and some of the things made sense. Some of the stuff wasn't really familiar to me, but do you have a kind of a North Star of transitional program that you want to push, that you think would be popular? Obviously, we know the far right is ascendant. I mean, they're in power here in the U.S., and they may not be here in a year anyway, because they're making such a mess of everything. But the working class is and young people, activists, middle class activists are casting about looking for solution. And yeah, that's what I'm really interested in. Those of you who've been to these conferences and you talk to activists there in the UK. What could people congeal around? What's your? I mean, I hate to put it so crudely, but your 6-point program. What do we try to push in the organization for it to be successful? And I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much for the comments, the discussion.
Thank you, Eric. Our next speaker is Carol, who has a lot of experience in the New Socialist Labour group. So, Carol.
Yeah, actually, what I'm going to say, which is going to be quite short, follows on from what Eric's comments, because I have no idea really what your party stands for. I don't know what it stands for. I don't know what the policies are, if it's got any policies. I think your party's on very shaky grounds. I mean, I joined quite early on, and was very excited that 800,000 people had shown an interest. And I think Roger's correct. There is a huge appetite in this country for change. But unless we address the issues that face people every single day, which is how do you pay your rent? How do you feed your kids? How do you have a warm coat for the winter? Let alone affording any luxuries. You go in the supermarket and you buy food for the week, you're spending about £150 minimum for four people, couple, and with a couple of kids. Bills are going up, and there is a huge deterioration in the quality of life for people. You can't afford a holiday. People are absolutely desperate for fundamental change. Yes, the working class has changed because, now we're seeing doctors, teachers, lawyers, and professionals have joined the working class. There's no doubt about the nature of it has changed. But it seems to be, and thank you to Nora and Ian for telling us about what happened at the conference, that it seemed that it focused on organisational things rather than anything else. But they couldn't, sorry, I'm not going to swear, they couldn't organise getting people there properly. There were people who had disabilities who were sortitioned, and there wasn't proper accommodation set aside for them. There should have been buses, and we should have been able, and trains set aside that people could get there. There could have been, knowing that it's Liverpool, people would have opened their doors. If there'd been a rallying cry for ordinary people in Liverpool to open their doors to trade unionists and socialists, they would have done it. But no, what is it? Like Nora said, about 2,500 people. It is, I'm sorry, in my opinion, it's pathetic. And it's even got a bloody stupid name as well, Your Party. What does that mean? It don't mean nothing, to be honest. Corbyn was terrified. I think Corbyn's finished. In fact, I hope it's true that he's finished. But I've heard Zara speak. She came to Worthing, where I now live, and she spoke. And then she did the same speech at conference. And I'm sorry, but I don't think there's a real depth there of understanding of how, the nature of the beast that we are actually having to deal with. So where does it go? Well, I'm not going to leave Your Party. I'm going to stay in it. And I'm involved in what's going on locally. And that's the only thing I think we can do, is get involved or stay involved in the local issues and then see what happens at the sort of national level. I was very interested in the dates that you gave, Nora, for nominations and things. So if that could be circulated, I'd be interested in that, because in our local area, I'm sure what I'm going to say is echoed right across the country. There's a lot of egos and a lot of people saying, "Oh, we're Your Party." No, there was another group. No, we're Your Party. So you've got these local frictions, and you've got a lot of egos, and we know that ego is the enemy of democracy. So we have to insist, we have to fight very hard within our local areas for as much democracy as we can get. That's it, basically. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you, Carol. Before John speaks, I just wanted to mention this. Carol mentioned the title Your Party. I wonder, is the Ur a reference to Ur of the Chaldees, who's an ancient Babylonian character who gets a mention in the Bible? Just check it out. Just struck me. It's a strange name, Carol, you're right. Right. John Dunn is our next speaker.
Well, Carell's just said much of what I wanted to say, but I'll give people a bit of advice. Stay well clear of it. It's a distraction. It's nothing other than an attempt, I think, just as the working class are getting more and more involved in fighting back. You know, you've got Unite winning massive victories all over. You've got strikes in previous uninvolved sectors, and now along comes this. Now, I watched it. I watched some fair bits of it on its channel on YouTube, and it started off with Lucy Williams, who's a great comrade in Liverpool, making opening speech, and then it just went downhill. And I think Nora nailed it when she said she feels let down by the entire left, because we have to look at what the left is. It's totally divorced from the working class in the main. Now, I know there's some good people involved, and we've had some of, at least two of them who were at that conference speak today. But look at where we are with this so-called left. 100,000 people will march for Palestine on a Saturday in London. And then real anti-fascists who are defending migrants in hotels are outnumbered a day later. You get 1,500 people marching for Palestine in Sheffield. Just round the corner, there's been workers been on strike for over a year. 6 people who marched for Palestine turned up and supported those strikers. So they're not involved in everything. And I think you have to look, when you look at this conference, look beyond the good people that were there and look at the caliber of the rest. Now, I'm not going to use industrial language when I describe most of them, but a lot of the speakers I heard were posing dilettantes, posturing about this, that, and other, the sort of people I call Fruit Loops. And they'll get, imagine taking on reform in some of the areas, putting some of these people on a platform, telling working class women that women can have a penis and things like that. There's now one of the policies of this lot. So, just around the corner, and on about strikes, just around the corner from this conference, there's a group of workers from the finance sector, newly organised by Unite, who've been on strike, who are on strike, diligenta. It would have been a 2-minute walk from this conference. Nobody went to show support of them. So, I think we have to not really worry too much about over analysing this and that. I'm pleased that I gave it a wide berth right from start, and I'm not being down about it. I'm quite optimistic about the future. I'm on a different picket line every week with the best people that you meet, the people in struggle. The working class people I meet with don't even know that your party exists, let alone give a toss about being part of it. So I think we should let it wither on the vine that it's doing straight away. Continue in the support of people who are actually fighting back. Take the fight into the communities, but not with a sort of, as I say, Fruit Loops that are involved in much of your party. Okay, the good people in it, work with them, but don't waste any time on an organisation that is doomed to despair. And the sad thing is, having listened to a lot of these speakers, I have more in common with my working class friends who unfortunately vote reform than with a lot of these. And I think I have a good chance of persuading those people who vote reform of the error of the ways. As for this lot, no way. You might as well have a dialogue with the deaf and the blind on a dark night in a fog in a soundproof room.
Thank you, John. A great analogy there. The only other speaker to indicate is Dominic or John. But following that, if comrades need to speak now, we're running out of time. They should think about maybe brief comments. So our next speaker, John or Dominic?
Yeah, it's Dominic.
Dominic.
I think I felt very sad about what John's just said, because he said, leave it to the individual to go around the picket lines. Where's the mass organisation in that? And what we're talking about, as I would see it with this, your party, if it's going to do anything, it's got to be able to organise as a national and international organisation to promote socialism and the ideas of socialism. And the first great stumbling block in the way of doing anything in your party is the leadership, or at least the Corbyn leadership, who want to destroy the organisation. That's the only conclusion I can come to with the antics they're up to. He doesn't want to play any role. He's had, 5-6 years since the last election. He's had the Peace and Justice Party, which has done nothing as far as I can see. And this organisation, your party, will disappear. 800,000 people wanting to do something. It must get your heart going. Think of what the potential is there. A quarter of that, an eighth of that, doing something at this stage would really shake the situation in this country. And I think what we've got to say is, well, I've got serious health problems, so I'm not very mobile. But the first thing that I would say we've got to start looking at is, how do you get the members of these groupings in the local areas to knit together and to come up with not just activists, on Palestine, but really come up with the situation of what does the working class need at this stage, and what programs should we be putting forward? I mean, there are Trotsky did a pamphlet on it. I think what we should be discussing with members, if we can get them together in the local areas, is what's needed. I mean, you start with a minimum wage, a living minimum wage. You start with housing conditions. You start with the role of landlords. You start with the health service and how you get that going, and what demands you put forward on that. And just think of the aspects of life, education, and the rest of it that we've got, and how do we want a society that's going to provide decent services for the working class, and we start putting them forward as straightforward, honest demands. This is quite capable to have a decent living wage, to have decent accommodation within the society we live in, with the wealth that society's got, with the wealth that the working class have produced. The fact that it's in the hands of a few gangsters, really, capitalists, who've stolen that from the working class. We've got to raise a program of how do we liberate that from them? How do we liberate the industries that we built as a working class from the capitalist owners, and run those in the interests of the working class and society as a whole? So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Dominic. Now, as no other comrade has indicated they wish to speak, we'll ask Ian to summarise the discussion, and then that'll be followed by Nora's summary of the discussion. So, Ian, go ahead.
I don't know, does that mean we'll not have another round?
No, I thought we might originally, but we've gone beyond the. I mean, it's we're trying to finish at 6.
I'll do my best to summarise and respond to individual things as quickly as I can. First of all, just to say I agree with Dominic or John on the first point very strongly about response to John's comment that it's very well put about just going to picket lines as an individual as opposed to an organisation. What I was thinking of was it shouldn't be a distraction from the class struggle, from the working in trade unions. That surely being in a party should be a supplement to that, and the people on the picket lines should have someone to vote for. If some of them haven't even heard of your party yet, that does mean that there's even further layers, obviously, beyond the 800,000 that we should really be getting back out to, both the 800,000 and beyond, turning the party outwards, as well as uniting it. By unity, I don't mean monolithic unity, just stopping with the really spectacular technicolor public fights of recent months, as well as other ways of being internal looking. I don't think I have to go into much more about the sortition process. It was covered by other speakers, just to say that there was a video released that almost looked like an ad for the National Lottery. Some people describing it as that on Twitter. And the whole article in The Guardian by Jeremy Corbyn on the sortition process as a way of doing politics differently because politics is broken, and that was the answer. It was so inward looking at a time when it was almost we're building the party from scratch over here. We've got class struggle and anti-war issues over there, as opposed to there's this urgent need for a political voice for real issues to be intervening in right now. So turn out from that inward lookingness as well, and bring the comrades on picket lines who may be raw and young, who you saw on the stage, John, and they might start to learn a bit more about industrial language as they were hone their politics and their skills in relating to people in that way. Certainly in Edinburgh, and especially in Leith, sub-branch of Edinburgh YP, we've already had a bus I was on yesterday that went through to Falkirk to confront the fascists at a hotel. And next Saturday, we're doing a food and clothes bank in the area that will be trying to make a regular thing if it works. So as one of our comrades calls it, deep community organising, certainly turning the party outwards from recent internal obsessions. To respond to Karel about Corbyn and Zara, I think in terms of knowing who we're up against, that's one of the better sides that I've seen to Zara, that she does seem to talk in a radical way about the establishment, the billionaires, even the monarchy. It's quite refreshing. I think she sometimes is quite raw, can make mistakes that could be called ultra left. Like when she boycotted the conference on the first day, that did create a lot of negative coverage. Whereas if she'd gone into the conference and put her hand up to complain about the expulsions, then it would have been either a powerful speech that she made or a powerful symbol of how dysfunctional the other side was if she wasn't called. Whereas when she did speak, she did call out that side of things quite powerfully, and also made a very powerful speech about the situation as a whole. It had it was the best speech of conference. It had the whole room with her. In terms of it being a overwhelmingly left conference, I think Matthew and Roger both covered that about the shrinking of the size of the party, and then of the pool of people who could drop everything with a couple of weeks' notice to go to Liverpool, take the financial hit, and so on. But what was interesting to me was that the voting at home still went down the line on the first day against what seemed to be the leadership preference, and for more democratic and radical things. The vote on the political statement, I think, was very important. Overwhelming majorities for socialism, for a working class orientation, and for a broad coalition to be built, or the broadest possible coalition to be built under that leadership. And I think all of those were important, and it was good that they were all passed with large numbers. And to be fair, I don't think those were ones that the leadership wanted to be voted down. Some people said it was time wasting. We were even debating it. On the other hand, even in Campaign for Mass Workers' Party meetings, and certainly at assemblies, the question has come up about the working class and so on. Should we be talking about it? Is it divisive? What about people on benefits and retired and disabled and so on? So it was good that debate was had and won. And I think it's very important because this is a mass split from Labour, probably the biggest that there'll ever be, certainly the only one, I'd imagine, that will ever be led by or involve the immediate former left leader of the Labour Party, given that Starmer's whole project is, if necessary, to burn the party to the ground in order to not have that Corbyn moment repeated ever again. That given all the mistakes and internal fighting, a lot of people have gone and joined the Greens instead to have a very dynamic new leader who's making most of the right noises on the left. But with a quite dodgy background in some ways. He was a member of the Liberal Democrats when they were in coalition with the Tories. And then, having joined the Greens, he was part of the witch hunt of Corbyn on both the anti Semitism so called scandal and Europe. He had one particularly nasty tweet joining them up, saying, as a pro European Jew, I couldn't join the Labour Party. Even heckled Corbyn, pretended to be a member and got into some events to heckle him over the EU, which was actually his main downfall in the election. So, yeah, he's since moved to the left. There's questions about whether that's genuine or opportunistic. But the bigger point is that the Green Party itself, for all its policies, are certainly better than the other main parties. It's been around 50 years. It's never said it's socialist. It doesn't now. Leader himself says that it'll do socialist things and doesn't have to use the word, as if this could be sneaked in. Yeah, to have an explicitly socialist party and a working class party is a key difference. Whatever policies the Greens might even improve on, there's talk that they might go back to being anti-NATO. I think it's good that Zara's differentiating us from them on opposing NATO currently. But yeah, we can't just have a mass split from the Labour Party become a pipeline to the Green Party, becoming the new main left of centre party in the country without a working class socialist party element, because we've seen how stereotypically middle class parties like the Greens being seen as the whole left in other countries as certain, or even socialist parties moving away from their roots more into that sort of territory has been very helpful to the far right, pretending that they're a voice for the workers now. Also, on the broad coalition, on the other hand, I'm glad we voted for that too, because the Stop the War kind of alliances between the left, the Muslim community that came back into the fore in the Gaza movement and the victories of some of these independents and near misses of others, was put under strain, I think, by the four independent MPs being put in an invidious position of the unelected leadership steering the party towards the conference and towards the elections for the Central Executive Committee. It's one reason I thought it would have been good if emergency leadership had been elected at conference. And they're a legitimate part of the coalition, but to be the leadership unelected for so long put them under a particularly harsh light. And of course, they're not from a socialist background in that way. Some of them are politically better than others. I don't think they're a monolith. The speeches by the MPs who were still in the party at the conference were actually good, I thought. But there's become some real nastiness on both sides. People saying, on the one hand, Zara made a very knee-jerk and vague comment about no social conservatives at all, which some people have run with almost in an Islamophobic way against Muslim involvement. Others, conservative elements in the Muslim community, I've seen on Twitter saying that Zara's not a Muslim because she's not obviously not socially conservative, which is also obviously nonsense if you look at her social media and the responses to her from the right. The level of Islamophobia that she endures, probably suffers more racism than anyone other than Diane Abbott in politics. So we have to bring these alliances together, and we also have to affirm socialism as the goal, working class as the leadership, to have the best possible movement that's not the Greens and not a little sect or group knocking lumps out of each other too. So I think that the votes on collective leadership and dual membership were particularly positive, because we have to bring the splintered left together under one tent, and that won't happen overnight. And we have to respect people won't leave parties they've been in for 50 years or whatever either overnight, or possibly never at all. Need a party of the whole left with multi-tendencies that can debate. But we also need the party itself to build up a better capacity so that maybe in a couple of years it's an interim measure. There will be a single leader. Maybe it won't be the same two people running for it, but we can't have a repeat of the last 3 months. In the next 3 months would have been a disaster if it was them running against each other. I think Corbyn still is the figure that you can point to a layman to say that you're a socialist in Britain. I'm with Corbyn, and should still be able to play a real role in that. I think Sultana is the future in a lot of ways. But we'll see. I think personally, I'd usually have been for a single leader just because it's something that the public can understand, that we can put up as a spokesperson. They don't have to be a dictator in the party. I'd like them to be subject to a lot more internal restrictions, as it were, than Nigel Farage, who owns the party in Reform, for example, or even a traditional party leader. But to have a single spokesman, I think, in most circumstances would be good. In these concrete circumstances, I think we did exactly the right thing. The membership putting manners on the two leadership camps to get their act together and to build the party outwards, so that it can be a mass alternative. Finally, to answer Finn's question on the trade unions and why other projects haven't succeeded in the past and what may or may not be different this time, I think it's almost the same question, that the unions are the mass split that hasn't split yet from Labour. And although on a level of membership in Parliament, I don't think we'll ever see the likes of Corbynism again, there is still that reservoir of the trade union third of the old Labour coalition to disaffiliate, possibly to make some trouble on the way out, to actually fight their corner within Labour, as they probably only now can do.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ian. Could you wind up, please? Because
yeah, so that is still the dog that hasn't backed, in a way, the trade unions, and probably why some of these other things failed too. But what's changed this time is that Labour is a rapidly sinking ship. It's in the teens in the polls right now. Starmer has destroyed the party in order to save it from Corbynism. And so we need to build an alternative so that it's not only the Reform Party, this sinister far-right party, as Roger correctly put it, that's a new kid on the block. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Now, Nora, if you want to make some concluding comments on the points that were made.
I've got a couple of points. On the trade union input at the conference, it was only mentioned on the Sunday. There was an amendment in the first year organisational strategy where it was approved that there would be a workers' movement commission set up by the CEC. It was disputed that it should consist of senior trade union leaders, but on trade union movement figures, because the speakers for or against didn't think that was a good idea because of the consideration that most of them are divorced from the union members and do their own thing. But that is supposed to be set up for the first 2 years of the party. Not clear what it's going to do, but it's around the affiliations and involving the keeping the workers' movement of the trade unions involved. That was one thing. And on this timetable, the document, the evolved document that's on the Your Party website for the first year organisational strategy has the timetable in it. But the first item on the timetable is the procedures for election published in line with founding papers, and that's tomorrow. So it should be that every member gets an email of the timetable tomorrow. But the timetable is in the document online. The one that was evolved, that went to conference, it hasn't been updated. And that was the organisational strategy document. And I'll leave it there because it's 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Thank you, Nora, for the summary and for the initial points. Now, this has been a good discussion, but it's only an initial discussion. We're only looking at questions, and we're going to have to go away and consider the questions in a lot more detail. It has stimulated a lot of ideas. We have to just go back and have a look at them. We all have some issues to examine: the issue of the trade unions, the issue of the future of the party, the structure of the party. My own point of view, I have to look up this word, sortition. I've never heard of it before. I wonder if it's the word of the year for the new Oxford dictionary that's been prepared. So I don't know what it means. But anyway, irrespective of that, it's been a good discussion. Comrades have contributed a lot of information from their experiences, and we don't know what the result is going to be. And there are differences of opinion, and that's always very good. And it's useful in the WIN discussions to have these differences expressed openly, because then we go away and think more deeply about the questions. So thanks again to Ian and to Nora for their contributions, and to all the comrades who contributed. Now I'll ask Roger to tell us about the meeting this next week. It's a very significant meeting in terms of WIN and the membership of WIN.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, before I do that, just to mention that comrades around WIN set up a couple of years ago an organisation called the Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party, and at that time the idea of a new party was not something that had been canvassed by any of the figures like Zara Sultana or Jeremy Corbyn or anything. And a lot of people derided us for thinking there would ever be such a new party would ever materialise, and they may be right. But nevertheless, we've been campaigning for that. We've had public meetings, forums. The last one we had was actually we had about 350 people came, and there's another meeting on Tuesday. And if any, perhaps we can circulate the link. So any comrades who would like to participate or to listen to the discussion are very welcome. Right, as Finn says, next week we're having a very important meeting for WIN. It's going to be the last meeting before we have a brief break for the holiday period, and it's next week we're saying goodbye to a comrade who played an enormous role and made a huge contribution to the development of WIN, who tragically died a few weeks ago. That's Comrade David Hempson. Many of the comrades will remember him for the amazing work he did, really putting us in touch with comrades from all over the world, comrades from the USA, from Belarus, from Namibia, from Bangladesh, and so on. And we're having a meeting, a memorial meeting, and we're hoping that all of these comrades and many more will be there and will contribute their, well, say their farewells, if you like, to a comrade who's really a role model for all of us. So I hope that comrades will participate. Thanks, comrade.
Thank you, Roger. So with that, and that's a very important meeting we're going to hold next Sunday. With that, we'll conclude the discussion. Thanks again for all those who contributed. So, slán a go